Welcome. We will get started in just a moment. We're just waiting for some more people to enter the room. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here. We'll be starting in just a few moments. So welcome to Gray Associates Higher Education Demand Trends webinar for community colleges. Today, we'll be going over data trends through February. We're excited to have with us Zach Paz, the man behind PES Markets. A few housekeeping items to get started with. At the bottom of your screen, there's a place labeled Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to click on the Q&A and add your questions there. We will get to as many as we can during this session, and we'll follow up later with you if we run out of time. Have you been wondering about launching a particular new program or what the potential job market looks like for your students? At the end of the presentation, we'll give you the opportunity to review programs in real time with PES and Zach. You can put your program requests into the Q&A at any time, as I mentioned, during the presentation. If you have further questions after the presentation, please reach out to me at info@grayassociates, GRAY associates.com. Now, without further ado, I will turn things over to Zach. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Marianne. Good afternoon, everyone. Looking forward to our session today. We'll be focusing on the results through February. And so, yeah, let's jump in. For those of you who are not as familiar with Gray, we are a software analytics and services firm focused solely in higher education. We have come to design what we call a complete program evaluation system, which really takes into account four important quadrants of an institution, from the mission, academic standards, margins, and markets. And so what we'll be focusing on today is really this markets aspects, but just from our framework, it's really one piece of really having a complete program evaluation system. One very important piece is to make sure that you have the people and process to leverage this information to make the most informed, data-informed decisions. So we help support, facilitate an inclusive an approach to that. And we'll always talk about how the data is great, but without having people and process to work through it, there's only so much that it can do for you. As Marianne mentioned, we have the opportunity to look at some specific programs. So if you have any you'd like to look at the end of the session, please do put that in the chat and we can go live into the system and take a look. So what are we going to cover today? We'll look at the latest information on student demand trends. We'll look at a few data sources that we focus on for student demand. One thing that we've noticed is student demand is becoming even more and more important as competition for students is increasing. And so it's always good to keep track of what's going on and what's emerging, as well as still what are the largest in-demand programs. We'll look at employment. What are the current indicators in terms of what jobs are being posted and what are the trends from the employment perspective. We'll give you a little bit of information around what's going on in terms of college athletics at the community college level, what programs are in, or what athletic programs are growing. Just very a nice way to understand from another student demand perspective. I know a lot of students not only go to school for education, but they also like the athletic piece. So we've been pulling a lot of information around college athletics specifically. Then we'll jump into the program of the month, where we'll deep dive into one program. This program is, so we'll dive into that and then we'll summarize everything we talked about. All right. So student demand, kind of if you think about the student perspective, it can start from what students are initially thinking about, what program they're going to take. Maybe they just think about the institution first. They then enroll in a program, and then they finally complete the program. And so we really believe in that full perspective of the student and trying to understand, okay, even if they start at one program and they might change their program over time, you still want to know what they're interested up front so that you have the right programs to interest students in the beginning. And then you also want to know what they eventually complete in, so that you can really understand, okay, how do we need to think about that for our program portfolio? And how is that going to relate to the job market, especially at the community college level where there might be more career technical education. So it's having this past, present, future view of what students are interested in, not only from their perspective, but also the historical view of what students were interested in to what's more emerging through a more current data set. So we'll be looking at 3 different data sets: the IPEDS completions data, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with here, the enrollment data. We work directly with the National Student Clearinghouse to pull that information through custom reporting. And then we also have our own Google search database to look at very current search trends for program subjects. So what's been going on in the most recent month? This is looking at, actually, this is for completions data. And so we just want to show you what were the largest programs in 2021 completions data. So the largest program was medical assisting, 50,000 graduates nationwide at the certificate level, which is pretty large considering once you get to the 8th largest program, you're down to about half the size. So at 50,000, we start to drop down to by 50% within the top 8 programs. And one thing to mention, this does exclude liberal arts and general studies, which would be a much larger portion of this. But here's a good list to understand, these are the most in-demand programs from a student actually completing the program at the certificate level. And we'll continue to see a few of these as we go through the other data sources as well. At the associate's level, the largest program is registered nursing, with 87,000 conferred degrees in 2021, which is actually relatively surprising to me. It seems like business administration would be up there as well, which it is, but I wasn't, it was a little surprising to see that it beat out business administration. And one thing that we'll see in the more current trends is that actually flips. And then another thing to consider here is, look how much larger registered nursing and business administration is to other specific subject areas. The 3rd largest at 25,000, biological and physical sciences, criminal justice, and even health and services and health general pulling up the last of the top 10 with 9,000 national completions at the associate's level. So there's some pretty big differences between the largest 2 and the following 8 here. So if you're thinking about what programs are really large, there's really 2 that jump out, and then the rest of them are around a more similar size. Right? So we just looked at all the past data. What happened in 2021, conferred degrees. This is students that actually completed their program. So let's start looking at more current information. And this is where we look at certificate enrollment data. So again, Gray's analysis of the National Student Clearinghouse data. And we're looking at new student enrollment. And a new student it was their first time enrolling in a program at this certificate level. And the highest new student enrollment for fall 2022, so very current information, is actually welding technology with 13,978 new enrolled students. That then is followed by business administration, which again, very surprising to see that business administration was not as much, very high on the list there. We have auto mechanic techs. This is at the certificate level. Auto mechanic techs, medical, clinical assisting, HVAC, maintenance tech. So what we saw in the completions data was medical and clinical assistants had the most completions, but here they're actually lower on the list for new student enrollment. So is there something going on with a shift of interest from medical assisting to welding becoming more of an interest in the market. So again, it's that balance of past, present, future that we're going to be looking at, especially when we get to the program of the month. We'll be able to see all of those in one place and say, okay, what's going on in terms of what's more emerging, what's moving forward, and what students are interested in potentially in the future. So we'll take a look at this. Here are the fastest growing programs at the certificate level. Cybersecurity information assurance, 39% new student enrollment growth, which was the largest for any program that had over 500 new students enrolled nationally. Commercial truck and bus driver at 34%, criminal justice at 33%. You can kind of see it's definitely a mix of tech, services, and even culinary arts here, and more technical, more CTE training or career technical education. At the associates level, here are the highest new student enrollment, business administration. So again, what we saw in the completions data for the associates level was registered nursing had more completions than business administration. Now we're looking at brand new student enrollment fall 2022, and business administration far outweighs registered nursing. One thing that this could mean, right? If we have more students enrolling faster, or more students enrolling in a program, but a lower number of completions relative to another program, could it mean that it takes students longer to complete a business administration program, for example, versus a registered nursing program? And so not necessarily we can't necessarily say that, but it could be one of the reasons why you see such a high number of completions relative to new student enrollment when you compare business administration and registered nursing. And then I would ask internally for your own institution, what is the typical time to completion of an associate's program for business administration versus registered nursing? Is there a, does it take 2 years to complete a business administration? Does it take 3 years on average, take 4 years on average? And how does that compare to registered nursing? As a way to inform and potentially put services around different programs to help students get through those programs on a more timely basis. So looking at the fastest growing at the associates level, cybersecurity information assurances, 26% growth. So both at the certificate level and at the associates level, cybersecurity is the fastest growing program in terms of new student enrollment in fall 2022. And then you can see the rest here. Baking shows up again here, hospitality, administration, airline, commercial, professional pilot, flight crew, education, and computer science, which we're going to see a lot show up in some of our other data sources. And again, we're looking at associates fastest growing new student enrollment for fall 2022. So now switching to the leading indicators. So we looked at completions enrollment, which is inherently historical views, right? We're looking at actually what happened in fall 2022 for enrollment and how many conferred degrees were in academic year 2021. Now, what are the leading indicators telling us? So we look at both Google and non-degree courses, databases. So starting with Google, overall grade tracks over 900 programs. And if you looked at all the completions for those programs, that's over 90% of all US completions. So we're really tracking keywords for over 90% of the number, 90% of the graduates. And if we look at this on a year-over-year basis, we can see in February, programs grew 4%. Program searches grew 4%. So again, these are specific keywords to education. For example, we look at associate's degree in business administration would be a keyword, or medical assisting certificate. Those are the types of keywords that we're tracking here. So 4% growth. Now that's the overall. Let's take a look at the highest volume growth. So this is the most searched associates and certificate programs. Basically what we do is in our database, we've now filtered for associates and certificate in the search term. And then we can identify, now do a comparison at the associates and certificate level. So this is for February 2023. Cosmetology had the largest number of searches, 423,644 searches. If you just looked at that number, it'd be very hard to understand, is that a lot or a little? So it's always great to have that context. And that's what you'll see when we look at the program of the month, is we do those comparisons to say, is 423,000 a lot or a little? In this case, we know it's the most. So following that, commercial truck and bus driver, nursing assistant, round out the top three. And you can see there's a mix of both CTE and healthcare, in this case, are the top searched programs at the associates and certificate level. So which ones are the fastest growing? One that really jumped out this month, and actually last month as well, is court reporting, and which was very interesting. So year-over-year growth, 48% growth in the searches for these for the keywords related to court reporting certificate, court reporting degree. Those are some of the keywords that we're tracking for that. Electrician was also a large growth area, 48%. So the top two were both 48%. And in this case, now we're seeing some other categories, right? We're putting court reporting in another category relative to looking at CTE and electrician and cooking, and then healthcare related fields as well. But so it's not just about overall what's going on in terms of searches, but when you start to dig into the specific subject areas, you can identify some programs that are really growing fast from searches. So what does that indicate? Is this an emerging area? Is this an area that if you have this program already, are you realizing similar growth? So it's another question to say, get that external perspective and say, we have court reporting, we're not experiencing the growth. Is there something about our program? Is there something we need to change? Is there some value propositions that aren't on our website, or different things like that, where we're not realizing the 48% benchmark in this case for searches? Then we switch to looking at, so that was looking at Google search. Now we're switching to looking at another data set that we've compiled, looking at scraping Coursera data. So if everyone's familiar with the non-degree education site, Coursera. So we basically go and scrape all of their data to say, what are the most in-demand programs based on enrollment, that they have courses, and how are those trending over time. So in February 2023, the highest cumulative course enrollment volume was Science of Wellbeing, 4.3 million enrolled all time. We then have English for Career Development, Learning How to Learn. And then we start to get into some very specific things, a lot of which have to deal with data science, data, UX design, so programming for everyone. We have neural networks and deep learning, foundations, data everywhere. So you can start to get insight into what are the potential future interests of students, and therefore how could that influence what programs that you're thinking about, how you read, what updates can you make to your curriculum, what new programs should you be considering. And then we can compare, okay, what's changing? So the year-over-year unit change for cumulative enrollment from Coursera, foundations, data everywhere. We just saw it on the previous page. It's not only one of the largest, but it's the fastest growing year-over-year, with almost 1 million new students enrolled in this course. We then have foundations of user experience design, 807, just right under that, almost 877,000. English for Career Development, foundations of project management. So these are types of things that could potentially influence your curriculum to say, do we have, in our business administration program, do we have a certificate that our students can get around project management so that they can then put it on their resume to then be a more employable graduate and get into the workforce with a higher, better wage. So again, this is the use case for this Coursera data, really to look out in the future of what's happening, what students are actually signing up to complete. Whether they complete them or not, that's another question, but it really is that a good indicator of interest. In addition to Coursera, we look at the Udemy data. So another data set or another site for education. It's a little bit more it's a site that allows a little bit more flexibility with the type of education providers down to individual contributors, not just institutions. So it's another look at more future looking interest. The top are software development, IT and software, business, marketing. These are at the parent category to give you an idea of what are the most in-demand courses on Udemy. So again, we looked at, we'll summarize this again, but again, we just looked at the past, what happened from the completion standpoint, actual enrollment, to the future of what are people searching for now, and what are they enrolling in these non-degree as an indicator of student interest. So let's jump into employment and look at the current indicators for employment. So in February, job postings declined 11% overall. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But within that 11%, minus 11%, we're going to find employment that grows. We're going to find other occupations that decline. So again, just because the overall is declining, it's really important to dig into the details in that case. But we are working against some headwinds in terms of employment. When we look at the highest job postings by standard occupational code or SOC code for associate's degrees or less, registered nursing is the #1 in demand occupation. That doesn't change for bachelor's and above either. Registered nursing is always one of the highest posted job postings. After that, retail sales, general operations managers, computer user support specialists, and you can see the rest of the list here. Here's medical assistants. As we saw, not only is it strong from a student demand perspective, but it's also strong from a employer perspective. And again, we'll look at how we combine all this to get that perspective. When we look at year-over-year growth, we can see the fastest growing programs or the fastest growing occupations. Radiological technologist and technician grew 54%. It's a pretty large growth rate there. I would want to dig into the details in there and see what employers are posting. What are they looking for specifically? Is there a specific market that is looking for this? But that's a pretty eye-opening growth in job postings that I would want to really dig into to understand. After that, registered nurses grew 13% year over year, medical assistants 11%. So you can see even though overall we're down 11%, there are still programs that are growing and occupations that are growing, and therefore what programs are still really in need. One of the questions that I always get is that how do we know what the gap is between what employers are looking for and what the supply is of graduates? And it's something that we can calculate with some metrics, and we'll actually show you on the program of the month. But one of the best indicators that I think we can do is just look at the raw data to say, what are the most posted jobs? And because they're posted, that inherently means there's a gap, right? And so I wouldn't get too caught up with, well, how many graduates are there versus how many job postings there are, because one thing is we're looking at is a sample of job postings. But again, I think this is one of the best indicators for gaps in the market in terms of what employers are looking for. So I do want to touch on some other data that we've been gathering. Again, a lot of what we're seeing here is that athletics do have influence on student demand. And so we're continuing to dig further into athletics, understanding how they influence your economics, but also, again, from this perspective of what how it might influence the demand for your institution. So here's the highest average participant volume, 4-year annual growth, and the largest athletic program for the community college division. It's women's wrestling that grew 400% in participant volume. Beach volleyball, 225%, tennis, 200%, golf, all of this, and archery. So a lot of women's sports are growing the fastest. So if you're thinking about how does this influence us as an institution, how could you offer a beach volleyball and pull that program, pull that athletic program together so that you can have your students more engaged at the institution, potentially interested in joining because now you have that program, and therefore ultimately lead to better academic outcomes. Some other information we have has to do with the expenses around athletics, because that's always a question that we get is, okay, if I offer this program, how much is it going to cost, and how do I know how much it should cost relative to other institutions? In this case, we're showing you the highest annual growth in expenses per player, and you can see at the community college division which ones grew in expenses over time. For some reason, badminton women's grew the most, over 2,000%. Golf for men grew over 1,600%. So it's just interesting to see how these change over time. So now we're going to jump into the program of the month. As I mentioned in the beginning, we look at our complete program evaluation system, thinking about the 4 quadrants of mission, academics, margins, and markets. And for this session, we're going to just focus on the markets because the mission, academics, and margins all have to are all specific to your institution. So we'll focus on the markets for today. So we've developed in this system a way for you to score over a dozen data sources. A lot of the data sources we just walked through for student demand and employment, but also competition. And the way you use the scoring rubric is a way to say, out of all of the options that are out there, and for my entire program portfolio, there might be 500 to 800 programs that are relevant for a community college. So where do you even know where to start? And so we designed this to be able to say, from a high level, weighting all the 40 different metrics, what programs are potentially attractive from the market perspective, right? So this is a ranking list. This is the top about 20. If you can imagine, there's 1,500 other programs as you scroll down this list. And so one of the top programs, well, the top program is registered nursing, but another top program that we're actually going to walk through today is licensed practical vocational nurse. But you can see some of the other programs that score very high as well. So what I would be asking as a participant is, if I see programs here, does that align with what I see at my institution? If I had registered nursing, is it really the most in-demand program on my campus? Or is commercial and truck and bus driver, if I have is that a very in-demand program? Is business administration? And that kind of gets you a way to set yourself in these results to say, yeah, this is kind of what I see at my institution. Or actually, no, I don't see information technology. So that would be a cause for what's going on with my program. Why wouldn't it be just as good as a auto mechanics tech program or something at my specific institution? So it really gets you to ask the question of, is it me or the market, right? And getting that market perspective to help you really identify what opportunities you have within your current program portfolio, but also with new programs. As I mentioned, we're going to be able to do comparisons. Like I said, when we looked at the searches for registered nursing at 400,000 searches, is that a lot or a little? Well, we don't know either until we do that comparison, right? So we designed a percentiling system along with a color coding system. So you'll be able to see both the percentile number as well as the color. So the darker the green, the higher the percentile. And as you get to red, the lower percentile. Basically, what we want to be able to do is say for each individual metric, is this a high compared to all the other programs, 14 plus 100 programs, or is it low, right? And so we'll be able to use this as a tool to get that context. So here's licensed practical nurse. It scored in the 99th percentile for student demand, which is basically the sum of all the scores for all the metrics in student demand. And we can take a look at this. Here's Google search volume, 3 months, had 826,000 searches. Is that a lot or a little? Well, it's a lot. It's in the 99th percentile, or in the top 1 to 2% of programs. Right. So now we have that context for that search volume. A lot of reports that I've seen from institutions that we start working with just have the raw numbers. It's like, how do you know that that's a lot or little, right? New student enrollment, 10,000 new students enrolled in an LPN program in the last 12 months. Sum of on-ground and online completions, 45,000. So all of these student demand volume indicators are in the top 2%. Then we can look at the change. Google searches grew 10%, new student enrollment declined 5%, completion volume declined 1%. So when all of these are pointing in the same direction, we start to be a little bit more confident. When they're mixed, there's a little bit more cause concern in terms of what you can really determine from the growth rates. But knowing this and how it compares to other programs, for example, new student enrollment decline of 5% is actually right in the middle of all programs. It's right in the middle in terms of the most and least growth. When we look at this over time, licensed practical nurse fall 2022 enrollment. So this is specifically just the fall numbers, and this is the most recent data. It's actually coming back, right? So there's a 3% growth in new student enrollment in fall 2022. So that's one of the nice things. We look at a year-over-year comparison, but we can also allow you to dig into the data with our systems on a term-by-term basis. So where you see the trailing 3 months was less than the prior years, it's now starting to see a jump back here. And then total enrollment is slightly down 1%. So new student enrollment, but total enrollment's down. So there's a little bit of a mix there. So let's look at the employment data. Again, the first thing to notice is the values, but then how do those values relate to every other program? So job postings, 472,000 nationally, that's in the top 2%. Current employed in those occupations, 677, that's in the top 4%. And BS annual job openings, 54,000, that's in the top 5%. So again, not only is it high in the top 2% for student demand, but it's in the top 5% in terms of all the direct prep job metrics. We'll look at historical growth is actually down 2.9%. So relative to last year. So that's one thing to consider. And what they're projecting over time is a 0.8% growth over the next 10 years. Then we look at job postings per graduate, 10 job postings per every graduate nationally for LPN. Is that a lot or little? Well, it's at the 82nd percentile. So it's not the top in terms of that ratio, but it's still above average in the 80th percentile. And then the wages, you can see more beginning of career is kind of what we use as a 10th percentile wages as an indicator for that, 37,000, and then BLS mean wages, 47,000. So all of this is national. Now for a community college, we can get very specific to your market. So all this data can be viewed at your specific market, whether that's a service area, whether that's a radius. Maybe you draw students from a 30, 40, 50-mile radius around your campus. Maybe you have online programs. You want to look at more regional view. So we can change these scorecards to make those specific views for you. And here's the employment trends for job postings and compare for licensed practical nurse. And actually in February, after it declined in January, in February, it grew 14%. So there's a growth in the job postings in the most recent month, whereas we were seeing a decline in prior months. So again, things shift pretty quickly from month to month. So you want to have that long-term perspective, but you also want to know what's going on in the most recent month, and that's where systems can help you do that. What are the highest jobs? Volume by job postings. You can see here's a list of the titles. LPN, paramedic was the most in terms of job postings title at 2,608. And then what are the highest skills listed for jobs related to this? Nursing care, rehabilitation, assisted living, long-term care. So you can really see what employers are looking for from a LPN graduate or a potential candidate. The third most important category, or the third category we look at, is competition. And depending on a couple of things, the type of program really changes competition for community colleges, right? You might have a career technical education, higher education institution in your market that you could be competing with for students, or depending on the type of program, or you might have other community colleges nearby, and you need to be conscious of that because maybe they're in your same district or something like that. So here's a look at competition. We look at both campuses in your market, in your local market, if there's online program competitors, institutions that aren't physically located in your market, but actually compete in your market. And then we start to look at some other indicators like what are the potential costs to market these programs. So we look at the Google search cost per click, competition index, give you an idea of how competitive it would be to promote your program online in Google. Another really key indicator is this median program size. So if you're looking in your market or even in your nationally, and you want to say, well, what's the average program size for LPN nationally? 29, and then you can look at your own in the same system and say, oh, well, we're at 20 or we're at 40. Well, maybe I want to look at it more regional and say, okay, what's the average in my region? Okay, it's a good way to benchmark your program relative to other programs. And then finally, we understand, and I'm sure you are all aware, that program subjects can be offered at different award levels. So in this case, LPN is 96% certificate program in terms of where students are graduating or conferring degrees, and 4% at the associate's level. And that's not much different, except for from the enrollment perspective, 88% are at the certificate level, 12% are at the associates. So you could see this little shift happening from certificate to associates. Obviously certificate is still much higher percentage. And that's from the completions and enrollment data. And then we have the National Workforce Educational Attainment data. So some college, 54% require some college, which would relate to the certificate. Another 18% are saying they have an associate's degree. And 24% are saying no college. So again, it aligns your program to the relative and the relative award level. We also can look at all the demographics of these programs. So for LPN, 90% of the completions are by women. I'm sure that's not a surprise. 45% are white, 20% are Black and African American, 20% are Hispanic Latino women. One thing we're doing, one thing that this can help you with is really understand what the student profile is nationally in your region or in your local market. And then how does that compare to the demographics of your program? And are you over or underrepresented relative to the average? And then the second is maybe you have diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And having this data, now you can understand, okay, what can we do to meet whatever goals we have? An example would be maybe you have marketing materials that show the underrepresented demographics in your marketing materials to, again, potentially influence those underrepresented demographics to say, oh, I could see myself in this program. So all of this comes together in what we call our program scorecard. And so this has all the different pieces we looked at, from student demand, employment, and competition. It combines all the different sections to a category score. So you can see for student demand score 28, 98th, 99th percentile. Employment was 21 in the 98th percentile, and competition was -6 in the 13th percentile. So very strong student demand and employment. Not surprisingly, it's also highly competitive. And this, again, is all nationally. And when we work with community colleges, we focus specifically on their market. So all of that comes to a total score of 43 and a percentile of 99. So at a high level, we can scan across programs and say, oh, 99th percentile, LPN looks like an attractive program from the market perspective. Let's go dig into details to really understand what's the opportunity for us as an institution. Is it a potential new program? Do we need to look at our current program for investing in it, whether that's curriculum changes, value proposition changes, marketing materials, curriculum I mentioned. So again, gaining that external market perspective to help you evaluate your programs and identify opportunities. So in summary, we have in fall 2022, we saw cybersecurity at the fastest year-over-year growth, both the associates and certificate. In February, Google searches increased 4%. We saw court reporting, and there's another one at both at 48%. Overall, job postings were down, but there are jobs that are growing, occupations that are growing. And so those are the areas that you want to make sure that you're potentially even sharing with your students and saying, yeah, if you're thinking about program opportunities, what you're going to go through, let's offer this type of information to say, these are the jobs that our employers are in our market are looking for, to help them realize what they should be doing or get more information so that they can make a more informed decision around what program they're taking. We looked at some data around athletics at the community college division, and women's wrestling was the highest annual growth in participants. And then for LPN, the program of the month, we saw student demand is very high, job postings are healthy. Again, that's one of the growing programs, even though there was 11% decline. That was one of the program or occupations that was growing. But you also need to be understand that this is a competitive program. But as I mentioned, that average or median program size of 29 is pretty healthy program size. So although competition is high, there's still opportunity for a good program size with that program. So that's everything we had for our February results. For our upcoming webinars, we have our next community college specific demand trends webcast on Wednesday, April 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern. So I hope you can all join us for that. And we also do a bachelor's and above webcast. I'm continuing to work with more community colleges that are kind of making their way into that bachelor's and above space, but also for understanding what the opportunities are from a transfer perspective and being able to guide students that way. So, if you're not able to make both, but I know we put both of them. So if you register, you'll get all the information for both of those.
Zach, if you are ready to go into our system, we do have a request for certificate program in auto tech.
Great. Let me pull this up here. So just need one more second.
If you have any other programs you'd like to take a look at, please feel free to put them in the Q&A so that we can get to them.
All right. So this page should look familiar from the presentation. We have the program ranking, and we can see the top scoring programs here. I'm sure we'll see auto mechanic tech here. Let's click on auto mechanic tech. And we can see a high scoring program, very in demand for student demand, high employment percentile. Again, low employment percentile tells us this is competitive. Some things that we can look at in here is we have a few pages to help you kind of navigate through this before you get to that very detailed scoring rubric. And this gives you that overview of the program. So looking at the description, looking at the national completions, looking at the educational attainment of the workforce, you can start to see what's particularly good or potentially bad about this program. All the way down to one of my favorite pages, this competitive intensity section, to see where all of the programs are located, how large are they, and then if there are any online programs, which there seem to be a few scattered around here, where are they located, right? So again, we can dig down into each of these geographies, but you can see all of the auto mechanic programs around the US. So we go to the scorecard here. Again, from what we saw on the previous page for program rank, overall 99th percentile, student demand the 98th percentile, employment the 97th, and highly competitive. Competition, again, looks at both volume and saturation and some other things as well. So Google searches, everything is strong here. And actually even the only thing that's declining from a Google, from a student demand perspective is the number of graduates from year to year. But new student in Google searches is up 1,400 searches. New student enrollment is up 1,700. So there might have been a decline, but we're starting to see most likely an uptick here with this new student enrollment growing. And that's a 2% and 8% respectively there. Employment, very high. Nationally, current employment and direct prep, the occupations are down, but there's still a good amount of job postings and job openings per graduate relative. So that's in the 85th and 83rd percentile relative to other programs. Those are good, showing that there's, again, this is a one indicator on, is there a gap in the market in terms of the supply of graduates and the jobs. BLS wages nationally, 31,051 as the mean wage. So we can actually switch this scorecard to, more local market. Again, most likely from the community college perspective, you want to understand what's going on nationally, but you'll want to dig it down into the details. And here's just pulled it for Denver. Again, one thing that we can really look at here, I love looking at the competitive intensity section to see who has a program in Denver. And you can see Front Range, Lincoln College Technology, Pickens Tech, Emily Griffin, Red Rocks, and Arapahoe. So there's a mix of both community colleges, but also career technical private institutions. Okay. Was there any specific question around auto mechanic tech?
We do not have a specific question.
And Marianne, you'll send the scorecard for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone who attends and everyone who's registered will get a copy of the slide deck, and they'll also get a recording.
Fantastic.
So if there are no other questions, I would just like to say thank you to everyone who did attend. And if you do have other questions that you think of later, or maybe you didn't want to bring up during the webinar, please feel free to email us at info@grayassociates, GRAY associates.com. Thank you. And thank you, Zach.
Thank you, everyone.